Chapter 2. Nobody from Nowhere. A janitor makes it big. The Texas State Fair is held in Dallas, about 5 miles from where I grew up in the Oak Cliff projects. None of the kids I hung around with had enough money to get into the fair, but we went every year. There's an underground sewage tunnel that can take you right there. We'd crawl in through a manhole in the project and start our journey. This tunnel was legendary among kids in Oak Cliff. I think everyone who grew up there went to the state fair that way at one time or another. My friends and I started taking this route when I was 13 or 14. The tunnel was wide in most places, but it stunk like you wouldn't believe. The sewage was about a foot deep, so we had to walk around it, sort of on the side of the tunnel. It was dark and scary, so we'd bring flashlights so we could work our way around the crap, and also so we could follow the lines that somebody had drawn years ago to mark the way. When I think back on it, I just shake my head. 5 miles through a sewage tunnel to the state fair? What kind of crazy mess was that? Other kids were driving in their parents' cars, probably getting all kinds of money to ride the rides and buy cotton candy. We were walking around shit, holding our noses, trying to find the arrows with the beam of a flashlight. This was summer in Dallas, hotter than hell. In some places, the tunnel got real narrow, and we'd have to crawl through with the sewage right in our noses. It was dark as night in there, and if you weren't the one holding the flashlight, you could end up getting your hands or face into something you didn't want. The tunnel took us right into the middle of the state fair. There was a manhole cover right inside. I wonder about the first guy who went through there and found out where it came out. What the fuck was he thinking? You should have seen the looks on people's faces when we would climb the ladder and lift off the manhole cover. We'd pop our heads out like little groundhogs squinting in the sun. Nobody even bothered with us, though. Maybe they thought anybody who would put themselves through that deserves a little fun. That's what we had to do for fun. Walk and crawl and run through a small stream of sewage for 5 miles. I think back to times like that and realize how easy everything is for me now. I think that's why I strive to make my life so difficult now. I'm not comfortable being comfortable. I struggled so much when I was learning to make my way, and now I think back and say, shit, that was difficult. But you know what? It was damn fun. I'm totally reverting back to those times now, trying to recapture that spirit. I can't be Mr. Glamorous. I'm too fucking good for you. I can't be that way. I like to describe my life as a black hole with a little light out there. I'm trying to get at that light, just like we tried to get at the light that would get us into the state fair. That light keeps moving, and it brings new challenges. Everyone has to find the right tunnel. It was hard for me. I walked through a lot of tunnels, made a lot of wrong turns before I got into the right place. In a lot of ways, I'm still that same little kid crawling through that tunnel on my way to the state fair. I never really knew my father, philanderer Rodman. He was in the Air Force in New Jersey, where I was born, and when I was 3, we packed up and came back to Dallas, where my mother is from. We did this when my father stopped coming home. My father isn't part of my life. I haven't seen him in more than 30 years. So what's there to miss? I look at it like this. Some man brought me into this world. That doesn't mean I have a father. I don't. I couldn't say, this is my father, this is my dad, but that doesn't sound right to me. I grew up with my mother and 2 younger sisters, Deborah and Kim. There wasn't a male role model in my life until I got to college and started getting my shit together. A lot of times you'll hear somebody ask an NBA player what he'd be doing if he wasn't getting paid to play basketball. The answer is they get pretty often as dead or in jail. Most of us are from shitty backgrounds, projects, ghettos, no money, no father, no hope. I think that's a big reason a lot of us guys make it. They're escaping through basketball. Sometimes guys say dead or in jail because it sounds good and makes them out to be tougher than they really are. But with me, I think it's true, and I have the evidence. I was homeless. Oh, pages stuck together. I was homeless for about 6 months when I was 19 during the time I was growing like a weed. I was living in Dallas, not going to school, not really doing anything with my life. My mom was having a hard time providing for everybody, and here she had this deadbeat 19-year-old son sitting around the house not doing much of anything. My sisters were 17 and 18, and they were the pride of the family. Anyway, with their basketball, they were the pride of the family anyway with their basketball and school. So I was pretty much in the way. My sisters had a gift then, basketball, that I didn't have until later. They were both stars at our high school, South Oak Cliff, and they both became college All-Americans. They were tall and strong. Deborah was 6'2", Kim 6 feet. I was supportive of what they were doing, but I was kind of in the background and I got teased about it. Now it's completely turned around. They're completely blown away by what I've done. To them, I'm just their crazy brother. But you know what? My sister Deborah, the next oldest, has 3 tattoos. She never had any before. My mom didn't want to kick me out of the house, but I couldn't tell she didn't want me to hang out around there either. But I could tell. She thought it was time for me to get my life together, and she was right. It was like we came to the same decision at the same time. It was time for me to go. There's a saying I have, sucked down. That means you're a drain, and during that time I was pretty much a suck down on my family. I wasn't working much, and I wasn't really stealing much either. That came later. The problem was, I didn't have anywhere to go. I was out on the streets, just hanging. I went from house to house, staying with friends, maybe sleeping on their floor or a couch. Many nights I just walked all night, going nowhere, roaming the streets of Oak Cliff like a lost soul. Other times my friends would walk with me. 3 or 4 of us would just hang out and stay awake all night, then sleep during the day. Some nights, I just slept on the streets. I got into a lot of shit living in the projects. That goes with the territory. You stay out late, have a fun time, do whatever you want. When I was there, Oak Cliff was like a big cubbyhole, with everybody trying to look after everybody else. I think it's broken down some since I was there, but back then people knew if they lost sight of someone, they'd stray, and then they'd be gone forever, eaten up by the streets. The fact that I was homeless at one time is part of why I can relate to people out there who are going through hard times. It's why I can go through a tough part of town and have a real conversation with somebody standing on the corner begging for change. It's why they see me as a real person and not some image that somebody in the NBA office created. I've been homeless. I've worked at 7-Eleven. I'm a real person with real experiences, and I know how easy it is to find yourself out there with nothing. Who knows? I sometimes think it might happen to me again someday. During the time I was on the street, I was noticing how much I was growing. It was unbelievable. I was about 5'11", maybe, when I graduated from high school. I was like all kids, measuring myself on the kitchen wall and always saying, "Man, I wish I was taller." Especially since my sisters were so damn tall. I wondered when I was going to be my turn to grow. Then I got out of high school when nobody grows, and I started noticing it. It felt like every day I was growing. I was thinking, wait a minute, I didn't know what was going on. It seemed like everything was happening to me all at once. I was confused and didn't really understand what the hell my body was doing. I guess I went back to what I've always believed. There was something in store for Dennis Rodman down the road. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I sort of found out by accident. I decided I had to get a job and make something of myself. I was 20 years old, and there was nothing going on in my life. I went to the Dallas-Fort Worth airport and got a job as a janitor on the graveyard shift. This job has become a big part of the Rodman legend. I can't believe how often it comes up, just because it's so damn different than most NBA players. At the time, I didn't think it was a big deal. I was pushing a broom or mopping the floors for $6.50 an hour, which wasn't bad money for me back then. I was just working, just like everybody else in the world. There was no reason for me to believe I'd ever do much more than that. I'd been stealing stuff for a while. Petty stuff, a cheap wallet here, a few bucks there, maybe something from a convenience store. Then one night at the airport, I was pushing a broom around, and I found I could steal these watches out of a closed gift shop by reaching the broom handle through the metal slats in the gate. There was nobody around, so I decided to do it. It was a challenge, and before I was finished, I had 50 fucking watches in my pockets. 50 watches. I don't know what the fuck I was thinking, bro. Some of them were cheap, but some were worth around $50. It was like nothing. It was so easy. I was big time now. I had these watches, and nobody would ever find out. I didn't want those watches. I couldn't even cared less about those watches. If I was going to steal something for myself, it sure as hell wouldn't have been something to tell them time. I just took them to take them. No reason other than the kick of stealing. And then I decided I could give them all to my friends. I wanted them to think I was a big shot. I wanted them to walk around saying, "Son of a bitch, that guy can get anything he wants." I wanted them to know if they ever needed anything, all they had to do was come and ask Dennis. People didn't accept me as much of anything at that time. This would be my new role, my niche. Sometimes I got the feeling doing wrong was expected of us where we came from. Everybody did it, so why not me? It was monkey see, monkey do. I just gave in and became a thief to be accepted. I was going to use that as a way of getting out of that mess. I didn't know they had hidden cameras in that goddamn gift shop. I went out and gave every one of those watches away. I gave them to my friends, my mom, my sisters, even to some people I really didn't know that well. Just handed them out. Nobody seemed to wonder what the hell was going on. They were just, "A new watch? Cool." I felt big then. Then the airport police showed up at my mom's house and told her they were looking for me. They'd looked at the films and had me dead to rights. They already arrested me. They arrested me and put me in the airport jail. In jail, I was just like everybody else. I was sitting there praying, feeling caged. I went through the whole routine. God, I'll never do anything like this again. If I can only go home, I'll straighten up and never be back here. It was the same ritual everybody goes through when they get in trouble. The same pitiful shit. I sat there and was honest with myself. This is no kind of life. Something's got to happen. I think I made the decision right there that I couldn't continue to live like that. I guess it was time to see if all those childhood fantasies of making it big were true or just bullshit. My mother decided to let me stay in there for a night to teach me a lesson. It was a tough night. The next day she couldn't take it anymore, and neither could I, so she bailed me out. I gave the police all the names of the people who had all the watches, and they went around and rounded up the stolen watches. They got every last one of them. They would go up to these people and ask, "Dennis Rodman gave you this watch?" "Yeah." "He sell it to you?" "Nah, he just gave it to me." The cops must have wondered what the fuck was up with me. What kind of criminal is this, bro? I didn't make a dime off any of those watches. I didn't even try to. I just passed them out. Looking for acceptance. Trying to be a big fucking deal in the neighborhood. Once they recovered all the watches, they dropped the charges. I was going up the stairs of the courthouse, nervous as shit, when my lawyer came out and told me to go home and forget about it. Nobody who got a watch put up a fight. They just kind of laughed and handed them over. Once they got all the watches, they didn't care about me. They were cool with that. But 2 weeks later, they called me in and fired me from the job. They told me if they hadn't gotten all the watches back, I was looking at 6 months in jail. In places like Oak Cliff, stealing and dealing are the ways out. It's the only way you get to be cool and noticed. There was nobody around there to look up to because once people make something out of themselves, they move out. I started playing basketball more seriously after I got caught stealing the watches. I was just playing with friends in a gym, and that's where Loretta Westbrook saw me play. It was night leagues, or pickup games mostly. I was just hanging at the gym, like a kid with a new toy. I was getting close to 6'8" by this time, and even though I was skinny and a little embarrassed by the growth spurt, it was like I had a new body. I could do things on the basketball court that weren't possible before. The only time I'd played organized basketball was my sophomore year in high school, when I barely made the junior varsity team and quit halfway through the season. I was just a little nervous kid who never got into the game, and I couldn't handle that. Just like now, I had way too much energy to sit on the bench. I don't know where Loretta Westbrook is today, but I bet she tells everyone she discovered Dennis Rodman. I went to that tryout at Cook County Junior College, and after about 15 minutes they pulled me aside and told me they had a scholarship for me. All this happened way too fast. I don't know if I was ready to start a basketball career at 21 years old, but I was going there anyway. By that time, it was like the whole thing was out of my control. I played only 16 games for Cook County. I flunked out after a semester and figured it was all a waste of time. I could have made up the work, but I didn't bother. I averaged more than 17 points and 13 rebounds at Cook. Not bad for a guy who had never really played any organized basketball. The talent was there, but the rest of the package hadn't come together. I went back to bumming in Dallas. I was hanging with the same old guys, but I never got deeper into crime than the occasional petty theft. One of my friends was a big-time drug dealer, and some of the other guys worked for him. I was back to wandering between my mother's house and the streets, doing no good. Back to the same old shit. Lon Reisman, an assistant coach at Southeastern Oklahoma, NAIA school, had seen me play while I was at Cook, and he was convinced I could make it. He talked to the head coach, Jack Hedden, and they decided to come after me. They were determined, too, because I didn't want anything to do with college after that one semester. Coaches would call when I was at my mother's house, and I refused to take the calls. I didn't want to hear what they had to say. The only reason I talked to Hedden and Reisman is because they showed up at the house one day, and I answered the door. I don't know for sure, but I'd guess this isn't the way Shaquille O'Neal's college recruiting went, or Michael Jordan, or anybody else in the whole NBA. When you look at how I got placed in the position to do what I've done, the girl convincing me to try out, everybody giving those watches back, then me answering the door when some college coaches were there, you'll probably agree. Somebody was looking out for me. I don't know who, and I don't know why, but somebody was. Those coaches convinced me I can go there and make something of myself. I think I had already convinced myself of something too. I needed to get out of Dallas for good. I needed to leave all that street crap in my past and move on with my life. I was going nowhere in a big hurry. Southeastern Oklahoma University is in Durant, Oklahoma, a town of about 6,000 people. Compared to what I was used to, Durant was a different world, bro. A whole different world. It wasn't easy for a guy like me, who didn't know anything besides the city. All I ever knew was the city and the projects, and that didn't prepare me for what I got up to up there in that small town. I noticed the difference right away. I was walking to class soon, and after I got there, some asshole leaned his head out the car window and yelled, "You go home, you black son of a bitch." That happened a lot. They'd tell me, "Get your black ass out of here," or "Go back to Africa, nigger." There were many times when I wanted to get back at those people. Pardon me. When I wanted to get back at those people, when I wanted to deal with it the only way I knew how, with violence. It didn't though. I didn't because there was a little kid there telling me not to. The little kid was named Brian Rich. I'd met Brian at the Southeastern basketball camp the summer before I started school there. He was 13 and I was 22. Uh-oh. I remember him looking at me funny, which wasn't unusual back in those days. I sometimes walked around with quarters in my ears. I don't know why I did it. Probably just so people would think I was crazy. Anyway, Brian and I became friends. Best friends. Brian kind of fell in love with me at that camp. He invited me over to his house for dinner, and I went. It was weird. I remember saying, "Why is this kid in love with me? Why does he love me so damn much?" The Riches live in Bokchito, about 15 minutes from Durant. Before long, I lived there too. Bokchito is tiny, bro, much smaller than Durant. There isn't much there but dirt roads and a few farms. The Riches had a farm there, and Brian's father, James, also worked for the post office. I had a room in a dormitory on campus, but I moved there because Brian and I hit it off. It seemed like the thing to do. Brian and I had something in common from the start, as strange as it seems. We were both coming off hard times, and we were both confused about stuff in our lives. I was trying to decide where my life was going, and Brian was trying to deal with having shot and killed his best friend in a freak hunting accident the year before. Brian told his parents he wanted a little brother. He got me instead. I think we came together at the right time for both of us. It was a real heartwarming story. I had to fight through a lot of racist bullshit living out there, and they helped me get through it. It was such an unreal scene. Me, who never knew anything about the project, who never knew anything but the projects, living with this white family, getting up at 5 in the morning to milk cows or do some other chore. These were people who had never dealt with a black person before, and they weren't totally comfortable with it. Brian's mom, Pat, had the hardest time. She was taking classes at Southeastern, and she used to hide from me when I went looking for her to give me a ride back to the farm. She was worried about what people would think, or say, if they saw her with this big black man. Sometimes she would take the back way home, going way around all the main streets so nobody would see me in the car with her. I used to make fun of it. I'd say, "Mrs. Rich, why are you going this way?" I knew she was doing it. I knew why she was doing it, but I played dumb. It didn't make me feel any less welcome at their house, though. It was all about image in a small community. People actually thought I was sleeping with her. These people didn't know anything about black people, so the only thing they could imagine was the worst thing. They thought, why the hell is he with that boy's mother? Sometimes they thought Brian was my son. I think the experience made me stronger. I learned a lot I wouldn't have learned roaming the streets in Dallas, that's for sure. I think I showed her a side of life she would have never known too. Over the course of a couple of years, she realized what I was all about. She understood I was part of the family, and she treated me like that. They're one of the major reasons I got up to where I am. I don't know what would have happened if I would have had to deal with all the bullshit there by myself. There were so many times I had a shotgun in my hand, or near enough, when those people would call me a nigger or tell me to go back to Africa. I wanted to shoot somebody so many times. I kept a shovel in the car the riches let me use, and one time I came close to taking it and banging a guy's head in after he yelled some crap. There were a lot of things I could have done, but the little kid said no. Brian said no. A lot of things could have stopped Dennis Rodman from being who he is today, and that's one of them. If Brian hadn't been with me a lot of those times, I probably would have ended up in jail. I probably would have used that shovel on that guy's head. I didn't know any other way to handle crap like that. The easy way to do things is to cop out and do the worst shit in the world. Then you don't have to worry about being successful. The easiest thing for me to do would have been to use that shovel or use that gun. That would have been a cop-out. Then I would have failed and had an excuse. Brian is still my best friend. He helps to run my construction company, Rodman Excavation in Frisco, Texas. And we talk about it all the time. We both went through a lot together, and that's a strong bond. When I lived with the Riches, I had to work for everything. I had to get up at 5 and feed cows, put sick cows back in the barn, all that farm business. It didn't matter whether I had a game that night or not. I didn't go to a school that gave athletes every break. I had a C average in school, but I didn't get anything handed to me. There was some special treatment that came from being an athlete, but none of it showed up in the classroom. If I flunked, I flunked. I didn't get any gift grades, just like I didn't get any money handed to me or a free car to drive. Just look at guys like Chris Washburn and William Bedford, first-round draft picks in the NBA who bombed out because they couldn't stay away from drugs. Guys like that get into trouble in the league their first few years because they're not used to doing anything on their own. I had my own set of problems when I got into the league, problems that had to do with getting so much after having so little. But all the hard work made me tough-minded. Eventually, I was accepted into the community at Southeastern because I could play basketball. That's when I saw the power and the bullshit that comes with having a little notoriety. I was the best player they'd ever seen in that area. I was a NAIA All-American 3 years in a row, averaged more than 25 points and 15 rebounds in my career, led the NAIA in rebounding twice, took the team to the NAIA championship my junior year, so they let me slide. That was the first time I was able to see through people, into what they were really thinking. I knew I would have just been another nigger if I didn't play basketball. You would have had to be dead not to see that. What they were saying is, we don't mind if you're black, as long as you can play good basketball. A lot of white people can relate to me now, and they can accept me now. But they wouldn't have accepted that struggling little kid I used to be. They wouldn't have accepted that guy who was wandering the streets, or the guy who lifted the watches, or the guy who dropped out of school. You're not going to pay attention to somebody who isn't going to, quote-unquote, make it. Society allows itself to put that stuff behind and say, okay, you're accepted now, Dennis, because you've got a lot of money. You're accepted because you're famous, and we like having you around. When I was 20, those people would have crossed the street to get away from me. Now they're crowding around trying to get an autograph. It's bullshit, and I could see right through it. There was always someone there for me, and in Oklahoma it was James Rich. It wasn't somebody with a lot of money or a lot of fame. It was a farmer who delivered mail for a living, a regular person. He was the one who looked at me when I screwed up and said, "Hey, you can't do that. You came from the projects, you came from the streets, but this isn't the streets. You want to go back to the streets?" When I first got there, I used to look at him and say, "Yeah, I do." "Tough," he'd say. "I'm not going to let you." That man brought out the human side of me. He made me a better person. He never let me get too far out of line. He never let me stray. He didn't preach to me or anything. He just set everything out and told me this was the way it was going to be. I had to work, I had to help out, and I had to behave. I learned a lot from this man, a man who didn't get past the 6th grade. He was like an old wise man in a fairy tale. I couldn't believe this man was in my life. I couldn't believe a man like that existed. He just laid all of it out on the line and let me know I could make something out of myself if I wanted to face up to reality. There was no cloud over any of it. It was straight to the point, clear as day. He looked at everything straight ahead. Everything was on a line from one point to the next. He wasn't the type who would sit down and tell me I could be a famous basketball player if I wanted it bad enough. He wouldn't fill my head with that stuff because it wasn't really his style. Instead, he would say, whatever you do, make it positive. Make it what you want it to be, not what somebody else wants it to be. When I left Dallas, I left everything that went with it. I cut it off because I thought the only way I could make it was to turn my back on everything in my past. I had to forget in order to move on. I had to remove the distractions. I put my mind forward and decided to make it, and I left a lot behind. Even my mother. My mother worked real hard to get us what we needed when we were growing up, and I appreciate that. I've done a lot for her, bought her a house, bought her cars, but we're not that close. We have sort of a weird relationship. Sometimes we talk twice a week, other times we won't talk for a month. I'm not real close with my sisters either. We talk sometimes, and I know what's going on in their lives, but I left a lot of myself back there when I left. It hasn't been the same since. The way I look at it, I had no choice. My family probably took it all the wrong way when I got close with the Rich family and started considering them my real family. I just had to break away from everything that was holding me back. From the time that you're a little kid in the projects, you're told to improve yourself. Work hard and get out of there. You're a success if you can leave that all behind. But when a black person achieves that success and leaves the projects and everything else behind, they get criticized for forgetting their roots. You forget where you came from, everybody says. I don't forget my roots. I never have. I always go back and drive through or walk through Oak Cliff when I'm down there. I visualize what happened there and what I did to overcome it. I go back there for perspective because sometimes I need it. It keeps me hungry and keeps me grounded. After my senior year at Southeastern, I was like this sideshow for the NBA. They looked at my statistics and they looked at my age. By then, I was 25, and they didn't know what to make of me. They loved my body and my speed. They all kept saying I could have made the Olympics in the 400 meter, but they weren't sure I had the right game for the NBA. Everywhere I went, I kept throwing out the same word, project. They kept throwing out the same word, project. They saw me as someone who might be worth taking a chance on because you never know how it would pay off later. I didn't care what they called me, just so somebody gave me a chance. I went into the postseason all-star tournaments like a man possessed. The coaches at Southeastern told me I could play in the NBA, but I don't think too many other people did. Then I was the MVP of the Portsmouth Invitational in Virginia, one of the big showcases for guys coming out of college, and that opened a lot of eyes. There were a lot of big-name players in those tournaments, and I kicked everybody's ass. It was the same as always, me playing harder than everybody else, being hungrier. Now the big-name college players don't even have to go to those tournaments. They think it's a waste of time because they've established themselves from before their college season even starts, and their agents and coaches tell them, don't go there, you might get hurt. If you're that fucking good, go there and show it. Forget about getting hurt. Go in with all the other great athletes and let people know you're ready to compete. The Pistons took me in the second round of the 1986 draft. I was the 27th player taken that year. I went behind guys like Kenny Walker, Brad Sellers, and Johnny Dawkins. The guy who went one pick before me was Greg Drayling, a 7-foot center from Kansas who averaged 2.2 points and 2.2 rebounds in his NBA career. I guess they can say he's consistent. I came right into a team with Isaiah Thomas, Adrian Dantley, and Bill Laimbeer, Vinnie Johnson, Rick Mahorn, and that team was set. They knew I was going to bring some energy to the team, but they probably didn't think they'd get anything out of me for a long time, if at all. Remember, bro, I was a project. Someone who needed a couple of years of solid work before making a mark in the league. One thing, though, I was a project on a mission. I was willing to do anything to stay in that league. I was different, an outsider, but I wanted to hang around as long as I could. I came at things from a different angle because I knew what I had left behind. I knew how hard it had been to get there in the first place. I loved coming in as the guy nobody had ever heard of. I didn't care. During my first training camp with the Pistons, a reporter came up to me after practice and said, "Who are you?" I looked up at this dude and said, "I'm nobody, straight out of nowhere."